Ooh, fancy,
And
fancy.
let's talk, because what is our objective for tonight? To talk about size?
Yes. It
Okay,
is what we were doing last week with weight, or 2 weeks ago with weight, but
with
we're going to
weight.
do it with size this time.
Okay. So let's talk. Um how would you describe size?
Um, how, what it feels like, the feeling to me is whether or not it's super wide, dopey, and open, or more small and like, tiny, teeny tiny, like a little tiny box. It feels, how it's been described to me is it's a container and you are changing the shape of the container and then making noise through said container. It's like a megaphone, that if you could make the megaphone smaller, it would be like this really tiny,
Yeah, yeah.
Like, and then if you made it really big, it would just be like, hello.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Literally that. So, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of like the underlying ideas around size, because that is, I think, an adequate and accurate description for what we're trying to do. But it can sometimes help to have some different layers kind of awareness. Okay. So on one level we can talk about um okay, so imagine we've got these kinds of multiple layers that we can think. We can think along the physiological layer, we can think along the acoustic layer, and we can think along the perceptual layer. Now, a lot of how you described that was kind of a mix. You were talking about that kind of dopey sound, and then like
Kind of like a more squished sound, right?
you were talking
Yeah.
about feeling like the container size was changing. That's a maybe more of a physiological thing, like you feel the back of your throat actually shifting. That's kind of that kind of behavior. So we're
The scrunchy effect.
the scrunchy effect, and different layers of this are appropriate at different times. I don't think it's a bad idea to understand the acoustic sort of properties that we're playing with, but at the same time, it's not essential to the process for 90% of people. So let's talk kind of physiologically first. So your vocal tract is everything from your larynx to your lips. The larynx is this cartilaginous structure in the middle of your neck, and inside of that larynx are your vocal folds, and your vocal folds open and close and they vibrate and produce sound. Because they are opening and closing so rapidly, it functions like a closed tube. And that has implications for our acoustic model that we're going to talk about in a second. But suffice it to say, we can kind of imagine that when we're talking physiologically, we're imagining that everything from your lips to your larynx, or your larynx to your lips, is a kind of pipe with weird knobbly bits on, like, stuck onto it, or like weird chunks that are suddenly much fatter and then smaller again and then fatter and smaller again, right? So we can sort of imagine that if we took my throat and poured hot wax down, I'm dead at the time, so like pouring hot wax down my throat and taking a mold, an imprint of my throat, and then kind of making a cast of that and then making another model, we could see that it's basically a pipe, okay? And that pipe has some little nubbins that stick off of it, but mostly it's a singular pipe. The length of a pipe changes the sounds that are produced inside of it. So if you imagine like a PVC pipe, and you like put a PVC pipe against your lips and you make a noise and it goes like, suddenly it's like really weird. Like, that's not a pipe, it's my hands, but you know what I mean. You can
Yeah.
imagine the impact that that PVC pipe is going to have on the sound. That's what's happening with the vocal tract. You're basically wanting to change the size and shape of it. So if we're thinking about that physiological layer, we can imagine that we're kind of taking the vocal tract, and then testosterone increases it in size. So testosterone and androgenization in general will increase the morphological features of the body by about in size by about 20%. And that 20% increase in size means that the vocal tract goes from average 14 centimeters to average like 17 and a half, 17 centimeters. And that change is going to produce a change in any sounds that pass through it. So that's one of the kinds of things we're thinking about with size, is this very literal definition of like what is happening physiologically. Then here's the result. There are some key actions that we can engage in to shrink size down. We can change the position of the larynx. So if we lower the larynx, I'm extending the tube. If my larynx is lower, that's going to increase the length of the tube and give me a larger sound. If I expand my pharynx, which is the part of the throat that's kind of this like, let me grab a little demo or a little visual.
Clippy doodle.
Yeah, let's do, we'll use the tongue diagram. Or do we have, is pharynx a command? Yeah, yes, bitch. So here's an image of the pharynx. So you'll see the larynx is marked down at the bottom of that purple zone. And then the colorful area here is the pharynx. The size of the pharynx is going to play a huge role because it happens so close to the sound source. It's going to play a huge role in shaping the initial sound. This is why you've probably felt that like changes to the front of your mouth don't have as much of an impact as changes to the back of your throat, right?
Yeah.
Because by the time it's arrived at the front of your throat, it's already been shaped by the initial size, right? The sound waves are traveling up the back of your throat and they're getting manipulated and morphed, kind of like morbed, shaped by the throat, right? And so
it's like trying to shape water after it's already come out of a garden hose.
Literally, yes. Literally, yes. Impossible, or very hard anyway, or a waste of energy and time. You're probably better off adjusting the flow of the water
Incredibly
hose.
inefficient.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So when we're playing around with size, what we're doing is changing the overall length of the tube, the overall length of that container, and the specific size of the pharynx. The pharynx has an outsized impact on the overall quality of the sound because it's the first chamber that it encounters. You can also hear this kind of secondary impact of size or, of the space that you're in. If you imagine that you're speaking in a, like, have you ever been in like an empty cathedral or like an empty big building and you start talking and it's like echoey and weird? You can still hear that that's your voice, but it sounds different, right?
Yeah. It's been influenced by the walls.
Exactly. And then if you imagine, like, if you've ever been talking to someone and then like walked into a walk-in closet and suddenly the sound of your voice has changed completely, that's another impact of the size of a chamber on the sound. But those impacts are nowhere near as powerful as the impact that happens in the pharynx, because by the time the sound has left your lips, it's already been initially shaped. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the secondary impact of the larger space that you're in, it has some impact on the sound, but it's not as much as changing this initial chamber. Okay, so physiologically, we really want to understand that we have to change this as close to the source of the sound as we can. The source of the sound is the larynx, so everything immediately surrounding the larynx has a huge impact on the sound. So all of which to say, that's what's happening physiologically. We can then think, okay, so what's happening? What is causing the larynx to change position? That's one way that we can get a smaller space, right? So one way to get the larynx to change position is just to literally raise the larynx. This happens when we swallow. This happens in a lot of other situations, but the larynx should be free to move 90% of the time, right? We're letting the larynx kind of bob around and do what it needs to do. But as it rises in the neck or lowers in the neck, it lengthens the tube. We can also shape the pharynx. So the pharynx has, let's see if these colors even line up. How cool would that be if these two unrelated images almost match? They kind of almost match.
They're reversed.
They're slightly mismatched, but close, right? So we can see these different muscle bands participating in pharyngeal narrowing, or what the community labeled OPC. So L something something, kind of was like hearing something that Z would teach, and Z was like, I don't have a name for it. I just demo it. And then L was like, we should have a name for it. And then Z was like, okay, cool. If you want to do that, have fun. And then L talked to Charles of Linguistics, and they came up with the term OPC, or oropharyngeal constriction, right? The literature that exists already has described this process, and it's used words like lateral medial narrowing and pharyngeal narrowing and pharyngeal constriction. So
Jesus.
There's already some language in scientific literature to describe this concept, and then the community came up with this additional kind of language to describe the concept. We might just want to call it pharyngeal constriction rather than oropharyngeal constriction. But at this point, I have so many people who come and say, oh, can we do OPC? That I'm like, okay, I'm not going to fucking fight. It's like, it feels like a battle that I don't want to even get into. So it's already hard enough. I'm already trying to just fight the battle of like, let's call it size. How about we just call it size? So this change in pharyngeal size is really important, and we do it through these pharyngeal constrictor muscles that you see in this animation here. And then, those are the primary methods of changing size, and they're going to control the size of that first initial chamber that's going to result in a huge change in size. Does anything here seem confusing to you so far?
Nope.
Cool.
That makes sense to me. Some of the confusing bits is like, how do you engage OPC, right?
More of the so how, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the physiological layer. Acoustically, what's important to understand is that we hear these sort of an empty tube. If you took here, let me grab a straw. So if I took this straw
I love this.
and I'm going to tap on the end of it, can you hear that?
Yes.
And it produces a kind of like thunk, 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 thunk.
Yep.
Cool. If I took this and it was really large and I went boom on it and I hit it, it would produce a boom. And if I shortened it and it was like half this size, it would be even higher. It would be like boom, 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 right? So we
if you had
understand.
scissors right now and you were cutting the straw down,
Yes,
it
exactly.
would change the acoustic properties of the straw.
Precisely. So we understand that there's these sort of like what we might call formants in the human voice, these like hot spots of acoustic concentrations of energy. And as we get smaller, right, as the sort of length of the tube gets smaller, all of those peaks of acoustic energy get higher in frequency value. So this is the thing that we perceive as size, or one of the things that implies size to the human brain, is this change in sort of a global change in all of the frequencies of these formant values. And the higher they get in their frequency value, the smaller the thing sounds. And that's because that's like something you encounter literally on a day-to-day basis. Like if you fill a glass with water, you can hear those frequency values changing, and then you can like literally go, okay, it's full. Let me stop. So that's something that
That's actually an incredible example. Holy shit.
we
A
encounter
bottle of
this
water
shit
being filled up.
all of the time. It is like a very common thing. And size, right, changes are so wired into the human brain in terms of how we like perceive those things that for a long time we were doing some wild shit. We were as Clover would say, like training mutant listeners to like try to hear individual formant relationships, and it was not functioning, right? People who were listening for R1 and R2, like that's not a very naturalistic way for humans to perceive sound. It is a trained way for humans to hear sound.
Yeah.
And the problem with perception is that
It's perception.
and we can be trained to hear anything, right? You can be convinced that any sound, you know, like, oh yeah, I can kind of hear that. And if you start to kind of hear that and then you commit to kind of hearing it, eventually you just start hearing it. So long term, our goal is to kind of like step away from that idea of like an independent R1, and the idea of like the gender knob, I think, is a little bit like not really happening, right? We're instead seeing that size is the major sorry, Clover, your gender knob, I'm gonna stop twiddling it. So yeah, acoustically then we understand the shorter the pipe, the shorter the tube, the higher those formants shift. And that's what we're kind of tapping into. The thing is that perceptually, humans aren't hearing individual formants. In the same way that when I go, ah, we're not hearing, you know, oh, I'm hearing a band, a resonance band here and a resonance band here, and hearing, ah, you know, those two bands happening at the same time. I'm hearing it as a vowel, and I'm hearing the ah vowel. So yes, we could learn to listen for those, but it's so much easier to say perceptually what I am perceiving is a vowel. Perceptually, what I'm perceiving is size change. Okay? So multiple different layers we can think about this on, and I think thinking about size spares people a lot of brain pain.
Oh yeah.
So, also narrowness,
Spared
Clover
me
wants to
so
point out,
many-
and I think that that's a super important point as well, right? When we think about pharyngeal narrowing and like pharyngeal constriction, it's not just part of the shortening, it's part of making that tube narrower, right? Sorry, you were going to ask a question.
No, I said it spared me so many brain cycles. Holy shit. I have recently figured out what R1 and R2 means in the dumbest way possible, and it's how fucking Clover explained it. Front part of your mouth vibrates, middle part of your mouth vibrates, lower part of your mouth vibrates. It's like, there you go, done. That's it. And it's just like, what do these noises mean? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, honestly, right, that model of like front space, back space, it was functional. It worked for when it needed to work, but it's so clearly a kind of imposed model that is separate from how people perceive this. And we were just trying to make it work. You know what I mean? We're trying to explain it in a way that I think was coherent and made sense with what we understood at the time. And our understanding has evolved. So, yeah.
I like how these are also functionally little history lessons too.
The little mini
Of how
history
it
of
got to where
of
it
what I
is.
mean, like ultimately, right? When we talk about pedagogy and we talk about it in the context of like your situation, which is you want to be someone who can help other people and point them in a direction and get them sorted, right? Like, which is what we want long term. I don't want to be in a position where I'm teaching voice for the rest of my life and like doling out a lesson at a time. I want, in the same way that like people show up on this server and they're like, hey, I want to know about fashion. Does anyone know anything? And Amelia goes, yeah, here's some things to think about. Boom, 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 boom. Every single trans Discord has an Amelia. It sometimes has multiple Amelias who know fashion and can help get people pointed in the right direction with fashion. When someone joins one of these Discords and they, are asking like, "Hey, I don't understand how to do makeup. What can I do for my makeup? Like, what's a good beginner look? What are some basic things I should buy?" There's someone who's like, "Cool, here's some things to think about with makeup," and passes that information along in a lateral way amongst the community. And I want to get to the point where there are enough people who understand this process that we can go, some girl can join us a Discord server and be like, "Hey, I'm not satisfied with my voice. What can I do?" And have the first answer be, "Hey, do you know anything about size and weight? Have you ever heard these terms? Cool. This is what you need to listen for, and this is what you need to change." Rather than, "Hey, have you ever heard of swallow and hold?" Or, "Yeah, here, this is R1. Start listening for this." Like, those aren't going to get people as a whole to buy in. The level of sort of intellectualization to understand R1 and then apply it is really high. The level of intellectualization around "this is big
and this is small"
is like, okay, like we can hear that.
I think another thing is people want to actively be taught by someone else.
Yes.
At first.
Yes. And people need hand-holding, and that's totally valid, right? We all have been there, depending on where we are in our transition. Someone who shows up and is like, "Yeah, I don't know if I want to start HRT. What are my options?" Even to have someone in the chat go, "Oh yeah, so here, you can get patches, you can get pills, you can get shots, whatever comfort level you're at."
Yeah.
So, ramble. I apologize. Let's continue forward, right? When we're thinking about size, there are a couple of different demonstrations that we want to kind of think about, right? I think things that are really important are understanding how labeling something helps us to target it. So literally having the model sound and going, "This is big,"
and "this is small,"
is really crucial, because if you don't have a very clear label for something, you can't hold on to it in your head, right? You're just going, "What is that? I should come up with a name for that." So finding a name that works for a student is like crucial. Whether it's, "That's a big sound,"
and "that's a little sound,"
or "This sounds like a giant,"
and "this sounds like a gnome,"
right? There's a reason that Clover's images that have those, sort of binaristic simplified versions of like, this is size large on one side and small on the other. It has like, sounds like a giant, sounds like a human, sounds like a gnome, right? Sounds like, what's the one but for the cartoon intelligence scale, where it's like dopey, average,
genius,
Patrick,
right? Like, or whatever, like we can hear not yeah, Clover, how dare you. So right, and then the I guess the crucial thing to understand about size, like with weight, is the kind of impact of androgenization. What we're really doing is mitigating the impacts of androgenization. We can't undo them completely, but we can change the expressed androgenization in a voice. And if we just do that, then we get the body to sound like it hasn't been exposed to androgens. And that is going to make a huge difference in 90% of listeners, right? We can hear a very 1, 2, 3, very androgenized. If I delete that, this still sounds androgenized. Now we understand, because we understand fullness, that this isn't a super high degree of androgenic congruity. So this doesn't sound like a typical voice, but I still hear this larger size as being, sorry, I feel like I'm clipping this. I still hear this larger size as being androgenized. And as I start to get smaller, hello, hello,
hello, hello, hello, hello, hello, hello. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This now sounds smaller. And so the body starts to sound de-androgenized. Dope, right? Like, that's the goal.
Yeah.
So, cool. some things to understand. Finding these super, super small sizes are a little bit harder than finding larger size, because large size, we have a few different ways that we sometimes encounter this IRL where we're making noise. Because sometimes we sigh in a larger way. Sometimes we yawn, and while we're yawning and we're talking and we yawn, we're like, oh wow, that's really big, right? If you've ever yawned mid-sentence, we have ways of tapping into that. Finding smaller sizes, there's no clear analog in like physiological actions that are also producing sound. So we have to start to find ways to target that in kind of tricky ways. So I really love, and I think that there's an essential step of hearing large and then the change from a larger size back to our baseline, whatever that happens to be, because this already starts to set up like point A, point B, and then if I can hear point A going to point B, then can I hear point A, point B, point C, you know, maybe point D, E, you know? So we can start to map out that trajectory. If we don't get larger first, then we don't get appreciable changes in size. If we don't get appreciable change in size, the student can't hear it. So we need to be really
harder to differentiate.
Exactly. If I did a really subtle, imagine that someone comes in for their fucking first lesson and I go, cool, you need to learn how to change size. So I'm going to start at this size and go, hey, and then I'm going to go, hey. Is it clear what happened? Not at all, because my baseline size is already not super large. So in order to get that change, I have to really exaggerate it. You hear me when I do this with weight all the time, and that one is super obvious because you're like, here, 1, 2, 3, that's really heavy. And then when I go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that sounds really dramatically different. And we need to have the same sense of dramatic difference between those larger sizes and smaller sizes. Otherwise, people don't hear them. So at first, some things that I really like to target just to see, like, hey, this isn't a functional sound and this isn't the way we're going to do this long term, but just so you can start to play with larger size, try this like larger fee, fi, fo, fum. And we start to hear that like large sound. If the student can do that, that's great. If they need to be tricked into doing it, have them yawn.
Okay.
So 100% if people commit to a yawn, that's like a go-to sound. You can get a larger size. Yeah, that works for like 95% of people. What happens with the 5%?
What about the other 5?
Let's think of the failure state there. I would have to like actually see what was happening like with the individual student and see what the issue was with them hearing it. I would maybe go to a whisper and try to get them to hear like, hey. I also really like that kind of like, ooh, ghostly wail kind of sound. Oh, and speaking of whales, different wailing, but Clover the other day pointed out to me that like scene from Finding Nemo where Dory like, oh, I'm gonna talk to the whale. We're looking for his son Nemo. That is all big size sounds, silly, goofy, and that's kind of also, I think, a really fun element too, is like, if you can convince a person that this is fun, you're kind of already winning. We come into it with a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, and if you can have them leave a session and be like, well, that was fun, that is going to pave the way for their practice. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I keep interrupting you. Please finish a thought.
No, I'm just agreeing with you.
Kill me. I'm going to have a sip of water.
You do that. What are other fun, exciting exercises
Yeah.
for
I think that there's
size?
still valid value in things that are whisper based. I tend to use them less these days because it's so hard. It's so hard to monitor a
I
whisper and not fuck it up. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Um,
I don't suggest it to people because I can't hear them whispering very well, and their mic's quality is usually
hot
just
garbage.
fucking
Yeah,
fucked.
yeah.
Yeah.
There are, I mean, some specific things that you can do on this platform to help with that. There's no, and I wish there was, like a really quick and easy original sound button on Discord. But if you go into the user settings, you can change sensitivity. You can change, the noise suppression and noise reduction. And we want all of those things to be
Yep.
off. Anything that's altering the
Yep.
sound is going to be a problem. And yeah. The problem is that like people who use Discord all the time are like, I don't want to change my settings because I'm going to be in
Or
Discord
they
call
do,
with
and they're on
friends.
they're on fucking Bluetooth headphones or some shit, and the gain is like 6 million because the headphones just natively do it.
Gross.
And you're like, sweet, well, good luck fucking changing that shit. Thanks, Jaybird.
We hate it. I
Yeah.
don't love that. And yeah, I think you're right. Like if someone's on their phone, it's not super good. It's not super clear. I I really think, like is a great like starting place, kind of yawny or kind of ghostly or whatever, and then have them monitor. It's really early, right? It's early days, right? If you're starting with someone and having them get larger, but if you're confident they're getting the right size change when they're getting larger, ask them what they're sensing. It's probably going to be nothing because especially for beginners, we don't have a really strong sensory motor sense, right? Like those those pathways take a long time to develop in vocal learning, right? But if we start with this kind of like, and we say, okay, cool, what are you feeling when you do that? I don't know, kind of like, and they come up with language to describe what's happening. The important part is not to like be dogmatic about what they're supposed to experience, but rather to have them start thinking, okay, the sound is causing changes to my physiology rather than I'm focusing on the physiology and I'm therefore going to get changes to the sound. But if you say, cool, that was the right sound, when you get the right sound, what do you feel? Is an interesting question to pose. Sometimes they come up with an answer that you're like, cool, yeah, I do feel something kind of in the back of my throat. I do feel this like expansion in the roof of my mouth. That's cool. I'm glad that you're experiencing that. But, like, and then what if you don't get that sensation? Or, what if we minimize the sensation of effort that you're getting if you feel like it's a super effortful, grabbed kind of quality?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, have them start mapping. If they can feel that, start to build a map with them of what's happening. This is a really useful way to start being like, okay, hey, especially for like a whisper siren big dog small dog kind of girl who's practiced a lot of focus on larynx height, we often have to get them to fucking stop thinking about the larynx, and to sort of start to rely on some of these other physiological actions that are going to be part of that larynx motion and part of pharyngeal narrowing as a whole. So for those kinds of people, saying, hey, that place where you feel the yawn in the roof of your mouth, can you see if you could try releasing the yawn and feel what happens back there? And typically what they'll do is they'll go like, okay, hey, hello, 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 hello. Oh yeah, it's like something weird happening. And you're like, yeah, cool, you're already getting smaller. Once we start kind of becoming aware of the impact of other things on size rather than just larynx height, it can result in some really nice changes.
How do we feel about pitch changing with size at first? Do you want to nip that in the bud, or do you want to let it just happen because it's fine?
I think it's important to understand, right? Like if they hear pitch change as the primary motion, or if it's happening secondarily. And I trust my instincts at this point, having taught for a really long time, but I don't know how I would codify this. So I would say, especially early on, see if you can isolate that. I like to, if you need to, fire up a tone generator. I also think if someone is presenting,
Wait, we should demonstrate what that sounds like.
let
So,
me do this then.
oh, okay.
If I grab, how am I going to play this out my speakers?
I can just do it.
Yeah, show me.
Hello, 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 hello.
Versus,
Oh, hello, 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 hello.
very good. So you meant show that. I was going to pull up a tone generator and do the whole thing. But yeah, that first one
No,
was
no, no, no,
really
no, no.
good. You were
Yeah.
changing pitch and size, and clearly we were getting both. And honestly, if a student presented that to me, step one, I'd be like, hey, you know what? That was really awesome.
Here's the gold
Yeah,
star.
here's a gold star. That's it. 100% gold star for you. Let's try to do it with a little less motion and pitch this time, But honestly, there are so many of these variables that go together in different ways, and changing size often wants to create changes to glottal behavior. And so as you start to get smaller, you might feel that the pitch needs to change, or that some behavior of the weight needs to change, or whatever. And if that happens and the student is getting essentially a primary movement in size and secondary changes in pitch and weight, I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to be mad. I'm going to give them a gold star, and we're going to keep trucking. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
yeah. What I have a kind of issue with is when a student does something like this. Hello, 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 hello. Where it's clear,
Oh, God.
if there was size change, it wasn't happening as a primary thing at all. And in fact, in the demo I just did, it was just pitch. You know what I mean? So especially this will happen when people hit like a little plateau. So sometimes they'll start and they'll get a nice little size change, and they'll go like, hello, 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 hello. And you're like, cool. And you're like, damn, that's like a little bit smaller than their baseline. That's cool. We can work with this. And then they go, hello, 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 hello. And especially when that secondary pitch shift involves getting larger again, that's when we have to say, okay, cool. You're getting some really nice sounds here. Listen to the middle portion of this clip where you got really small, and then listen to what happens as you get larger again towards the top, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a case like that, I would say be careful, monitor for pitch, fire up a tone generator, have them have that link handy during their practice for a while. I think this is one of the cases where some external feedback can be beneficial. A little bit of augmented feedback can be useful in this case. So if you get them to download Vocal Pitch Monitor or something on their phone, not one of the ones that gives an assessment, but just a straight up like pitch tracking app, and then just see that line moving and then say, okay, cool. We want the line to be around here, between like 180 hertz and like 250 hertz. Anywhere in there is going to be probably chill. And then if you can keep it in that zone and there's not a lot of movement when you're getting size change, that's going to be ideal. And then the visual feedback starts to help. I like to say, be careful. I'll straight up tell the student, this is habit forming. And if you get used to relying on the external feedback, then your brain is not going to learn how to do this task on its own. It's going to rely on the tool it has. So I say, I would recommend using it to verify your analysis rather than as the primary tool of analysis. By which I mean, if you make an attempt and you think, okay, did my pitch change? Yeah, but not that much. Or, yeah, I think that was a lot of pitch change. And then look at the app for confirmation or for what's the opposite of confirmation in this tense, in this sense, but you know what I mean. Like the app will confirm or yeah,
Invalidation.
it will validate or invalidate your hypothesis. As long as you're doing the work first, I think it's much more beneficial than like reflexively looking at the app to make your decisions for you. Because
I think another thing that's useful is just messing around with the app, and just going
yes,
to see what that feels like for you and each of those different noises you make. Maybe change the size while you do it too,
yeah, because we don't
to
care,
see
right?
if you
At
truly
first,
are.
it's just like you're
Yeah.
exploring, especially for people who maybe have a history of vocal underdoing or people who are, you know, not super confident in their ability to produce pitches at a wide range. Sometimes the answer is, why don't you spend some time doing some pitch work? Why don't you spend some time getting really confident with pitch and being able to feel changes in pitch and produce a wide range of pitches with a wide range of weights? So often with students like that, if I hear in a voice like that early on, something like that is happening, I default to like, cool, I love this. And I do some size change that is on a whisper, which you said sometimes doesn't work, but that way at least we're removing the pitched and voiced component. So we'll do a little bit of
Can we
whispering.
demo it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get a little closer to the mic. And some things to note with size change in a whisper are that we want to be really relaxed. So often at this time, I'll take a moment to be like, cool, can we hear a quality shift between these different whispers? I'll say something like, hello, 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 or hey, hey, hey. And then I'll say, okay, now I'm going to go a little harsher, or I'm going to say like, I'm going to act like I'm trying to cheat on a test, which is the typical thing I say. And then I'll be like,
Yes.
hey, what's the answer to number 5? And we can hear that kind of stage whisper quality. It's a little bit different. And then I'll say something like, okay, what do you feel when you get that sound? Oh, it sounds or it feels, or I get this kind of feeling. You know, people will sometimes say like tight, tense, constricted, raspy, hoarse. You know, there's a lot of different ways that is perceived to different people. Sometimes they respond
Strain and pain.
Sometimes they're responding to the sound. Sometimes they're responding to the sensation. It's important to just build in the awareness that those things are linked, right? That's a kind of inefficient sound. At this point, I'll start to layer in quite like some ideas of like, this is going to result in a less efficient sound for you long term. And then they'll say, okay, let's go back to that first whisper and try to go even lighter and even softer. And then typically at this point, I'll say, hey, if I can't hear you, I'd rather not hear you than have you try to be audible. So students will sometimes be like, hey, because they want me to hear. And I really much prefer they don't, because I will hear snippets. I'll hear like, and that's enough for me to go, cool, I'm hearing size change. You know, I don't need to hear the whole gesture to understand that they're getting the right behavior. And I'd rather not if it's going to involve that. And then the secondary thing, I guess I'll do a proper demonstration of this. So I'm going to get really close to the mic and go.
Hello, 1, 2, 3.
That kind of thing. So that's deleting kind of the voiced aspect. And if someone can hear that, sometimes they can't. So I'll start even more basic. I'll be like, okay, can you imitate the ice cave on Hoth from fucking episode 5 of Star Wars? And be like, and if they do the, I'll be like, cool, that was large. You started big. Awesome. Well done. Really good job. Let's try doing that and go.
Mimic a water
Yeah,
bottle.
mimic the sound of
filling
water
up.
filling up a jar or a water bottle or what the fuck ever. The goal is just to get that motion and get that idea of like, I'm changing size. This is large. It's a big empty cave.
A much more narrow opening, right?
So then, if that's happening, we can hear the whispers and size change on whispers, and that sounds really good. Cool, 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 cool. Then I'll probably say, hey, so it sounds like this is happening, and you're getting some really nice behaviors on the whisper, but I need you to spend some time focusing on pitch. And, typically if they're an underdoer, and they can't even like get phonation above a G, G3, then that's when we start like, okay, here's like let's start with some really delicate like SOVTEs. Let's try a straw in water. Let's just, let's start with what we can to get any kind of sound going and then be like, okay, that's actually what we're going to spend this time until the next time I see you. That's what we're going to work on. Because if people can't independently control pitch on a very comfortable sort of basis or in a very comfortable way, then layering on size change is just like you're on the unicycle and then I'm throwing you a knife and asking you to juggle 7 knives. Like it's impossible. We can't do it. Once you can ride the unicycle fine and you can, you feel like you're able to control pitch really, really easily and you're able to talk in a wide range of pitches and you feel like you can find some degree of stability in that. In a range of sounds from, quite low to quite high. And if you can do all of that without really having to think, then you're ready to start juggling and then we can start thinking about size, But if we start trying to do too much at once, chances are you're just going to fall and hurt yourself. So,
They get stabbed 7 times.
Yes, with all 7 knives. That's actually part of the trick, is if you can get all 7 to hit you. So cool. Size. I think another little fun size exploration is going to be like little creaky sounds. We want to be careful with these because I don't think it's like a universal thing. It's very easy for these to come out really like
Constricted.
right, trying to get to that witchier kind of sound, but especially if someone has hit a kind of like hello, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they can't seem to get any smaller. Hello, hello, hello. Then for them, I'm like, okay, hey, well, why don't we just teach you that you can get a little smaller? Hello, and do kind of that kind of exploration. If you can keep things nice and relaxed, monitor, of course, for any kind of false fold constriction. And if they're already showing signs of FEF, then honestly, take the slight size change they're already getting and call it a W and just be like, cool, as you start to habituate this like lighter sound and as you start to get a little smaller, if it's not quite getting to the size that you want, it doesn't matter right this second. Because so long as you can hear that kind of under full quality, you can slowly start to make little adjustments in size over the course of like the next 2 weeks, the next month, the next 3 months. And you slowly start to get a little smaller, a little bit at a time. And that's more likely to lead to success than like trying to brute force a size change and getting all kinds of extra stuff happening. That said, on the flip side, sometimes we need to go for like a gnome. Sometimes we just need to go,
hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
and just be like, cool, that's a size that you're not used to being at, and it sucks. It's not the goal. It doesn't sound like a girl. I'm sorry, but our intention isn't to sound feminine. It's just to change size right now. And in order to learn what that sounds like, you're going to have to aim for this kind of silly, cartoonish sound, this kind of atypical sound production.
We did that with vocal fry.
Yeah. Right?
Hey.
once you can do that, like that's lit. It continues to be lit. So yeah, there's a wide range of ways to start hearing sighs and start exploring sighs. It really depends on what the student is presenting, right? And there's a lot of potential failure states in size change. You know, there's the carte blanche, like everyone has to, that's not what that means, but whatever. There's like the absolute, like everyone gets the spiel about like, hey, when you start changing size, you have to keep it really chill. You know, find the easiest kind of production that you can to start with.
This should feel very relaxed and very chill. And then as you start changing size, it should not get any more fucked up. You shouldn't feel like it goes, hey,
it's so hard. That's not success.
Not
That's
the
not what
vibe.
we're looking for. So typical things to watch out for. Oh, and I forgot, on the whisper, or just in size change in general, sometimes people will introduce some knurtle.
Ew.
Dog,
Oh,
it's
wow.
the worst. When people, so there are at least like 2 teachers in this space that I know of who use knurtle and believe that knurtle is part of pharyngeal narrowing. I could not disagree more vociferously. I think it is a really bad conflation to make, and it will result in fucked up sounds, just atypical, cartoonish sound qualities that are very, very difficult to unpack. Once people
You'll never be able to say
never be able to
again.
say 4 again. Once people have once people have started associating knurtle with size, that shit gets baked on so hard, and you're gonna be in the sink fucking scrubbing really hard to get that shit out of there. It is a very, very difficult feature to remove from a voice. So if you hear on a whisper something like this, I don't care how good the size change is, fucking stop them and be like, hey, did you hear that? That trip to the dentist that you just took there? Fucking, we can't let that happen. Any kind of turbulence that happens on a whisper is going to be an indication of some kind of inefficiency in the gesture of size change. So if you're like, how lovely, I'm so much smaller, cool, that shit sucks. And if that's what your size change feels like, then you need to back way the fuck off on air and find something way lighter. If you get size change and this happens, find a way to approach that sound again and avoid that knurtle. I literally was internalizing a high degree of knurtle in whispers because I was fucking teaching people, and I was so concerned that the student wasn't able to hear me that I was like, and it literally, Clover had to like find me and like come in the night and be like, hey, do you know that you're doing this? And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? You know, like straight up.
What do you
What do you
mean?
mean? I don't know what you're talking about. This is just like the way that I talk. It's like totally fine. And yeah, so
I didn't tell.
it is a trap to fall into. And the fact that there are people out there who are like, oh yeah, you should absolutely do that and do it some more. Lean into it even more. It's going to help make your voice even more feminine. That is such a wild claim to me, that is just not borne out by the experience and the perception to me. If I go, hey, 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 versus, hey, 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 this second voice doesn't sound more femme to me, you know? Even if it's like a slight degree of knurtle, like it just sounds like an atypical voice. And if I were a cis woman and I had this sound, I'd probably be chill, you know? Like no one's gonna fucking like come through my life. But I'm not trying to sound like all my girls have fucking knurtle. I don't think that's the vibe. So yeah.
That's it. That's all. That's size change. We're a little over time, so I.
Do you want me to stick some quarters in the machine so you can give me your tip jar?
I'm a little done, I think. So I don't know if I can go much further anyway. But if you have more questions, why don't you like process this? And if there's more shit that you want to
Oh,
do
yeah.
at some point in the future, let me know.
Yeah, I have another lesson quote. Oh, you should stop the
Oh, okay,
recording.
yeah. Let me end Craig's life.
Die, Craig. Goodbye,
Bye.
Craig.